Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's live session. This is Ria Pramanik. So, we are continuing with our course that is BPSC 144 Introduction to South Asia. So, today in today's session, we will be covering Unit 5 that is Political Structures and Processes in Sri Lanka and the Maldives. So, we will be learning about how the politics is performing, how there are political processes happening in these two countries. We have covered other countries in our previous sessions. Today, we will be also knowing about Nepal, Bhutan, and Afghanistan. So, let's start with today's session. So, first of all, we will introduce this unit that is about the political system and processes in two countries, Sri Lanka and the Maldives. So let's start with what political system means. So political system, as per David Easton, he defines it as that a system of interaction in any society through which binding or authoritative allocations are made. So according to David Easton, he defines political system as a system of interaction in any kind of society through which there is a binding and you can say an authoritative allocations of resources are made. So such a political system, according to Gabriel Armand and James Coleman, has three core functions. So according to Gabriel Armand and James Coleman, they define about three core functions that a political system do. The first one is maintaining the integration of society by determining norms. Secondly, it adapts and changes elements of social, economic, and religious systems necessary for achieving collective goals. And lastly, it protects the integrity of the political system from outside threats. So, political system basically is all about how to maintain the integration of the society, how to save it from the outside threat, and adapting the changing elements of social, economic, religious system so that they can achieve a goal. So let's start with the political processes and its system in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka was earlier known as Ceylon and it is a small island state. It is also considered as the oceanic cockpit of Asia. This is something to note it down that Sri Lanka was earlier known as Ceylon. So there are many texts and many books which refer Sri Lanka as Ceylon, and there is a confusion arise that what this Ceylon means. So the earlier Sri Lanka was known as Ceylon, and it is also considered as the oceanic cockpit of Asia. The country acted as an entry point, a midpoint meeting place, a harbor, an emporium of international merchandise, and a landfall. So, this place is very, very important, strategically very important, and it has many important things to do. So, Sri Lanka is not just an island country, but it is also one of the countries which plays a very important role in international merchandise. So, as a result, the island attracted attention of major powers of the world from time to time. As I told you that this place is strategically located and its geographical location is such that it considered to be one of the most important place, and that is the reason why it attracted so many outside powers and outside countries from time to time. So let's talk about how the composition of Sri Lanka is in its internal sphere. So Sri Lanka is a multi-ethnic society. Multi means more than one. So there are more than one ethnicities that resides in Sri Lanka, where 75% of the population are Sinhalese. So basically, the majority of the population in Sri Lanka belongs to this Sinhala community. Secondly, the 11% are Sri Lankan Tamils, 9% Muslims, 4% plantation Tamils, and 1% others. So there is a difference between Sri Lankan Tamils and plantation Tamils because plantation Tamils went to that country from India during the plantation drives that Britishers took initiative of. So Sri Lanka is a place there is a huge plantation, tea plantation, coffee plantation happened at one point of time during the British rule, and for the purpose of agriculture, the purpose of production and harvesting all the crops, the cash crops, Britishers used to take the laborers from India to Sri Lanka. So that is why they are considered to be as plantation Tamils. Let's talk about the political structures in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka is a former British colony and it got independence on 4th February 1948. Sri Lanka's present political structures and processes are guided by its third constitution. So, as I already discussed about countries who have more than one constitution, unlike India, so India is a country where there is only one constitution which is coming and which is running through the inception of that constitution. But there are many countries where more than one constitution is adopted, and in Sri Lanka, it is now the presently it is the third constitution which is there in their country. So this third constitution, was enacted in 1978. Earlier, there were two more, and that were in 1947 and 1972. So, this constitution is amended 20 times so far. So, 1978 constitution that is presently in vogue declared Sri Lanka as a democratic republic. So, the political system, political structure of Sri Lanka is a democratic republic, and it is a hybrid mix of presidential and parliamentary form of government on the lines of French Fifth Republic. So there is both presidential and parliamentary form of government. So before 1978, before this third constitution came into being, Sri Lanka had a Westminster style parliamentary form of government. This Westminster style parliamentary form of government was there in British when these countries were in the clutches of British power, British imperial power. So, because Britishers also follow this kind of parliamentary form, that is why it inherited from that colonial rule. So, unlike India, Sri Lankan polity is unitary in nature. So, there is unitary system in Sri Lanka. It is divided into 9 provinces and 25 administrative districts. Also, there is something which is very important to note, that Buddhism, the religion Buddhism, is given the foremost place under the constitution. So Sri Lankan constitution, the 1978 constitution, even before that, it is Buddhism which is given the foremost place. Sinhala and Tamil are recognized as official and national languages with English as the link language. So Sinhala and Tamil are recognized as official language and national language with English as the link language. So English is considered to be the link language also because there is a history of English people ruling this land. So executive power in Sri Lanka is exercised by the president, and he or she, whether it is a lady prime minister or president, both head of the state, head of the government, and commander in chief of Sri Lankan armed forces. So it is the president who is both the head of the state, head of the government, and also the commander in chief of armed forces. So, elected directly by the people for a term of 5 years, president is also vested with wide legislative, judicial, diplomatic, military, and ceremonial powers. So, president has a very important role to play in Sri Lanka, and it is the post and the position that a president having is directly elected by the people, and the term is for 5 years. And what are all the powers that is vested in president? It is the legislative, judicial, diplomatic, military, and ceremonial powers that is there in that is vested in president of Sri Lanka. So the 20th Amendment to the Constitution, October 2020, has further strengthened the office of the president. So the amendment which came in the year 2020 October month, it was the 20th amendment. It also strengthened more the position of president. So the president has the right to attend, address, and send messages to parliament at any time. This is an exclusive power that is given to the president of Sri Lanka, that it can attend, it can address, and it can send message to the parliament also at any point of time. So he is entitled to all these privileges, immunities, and powers of a member of parliament other than the right to vote. So all these things are there, but it doesn't have a right to vote. So the president can summon, prorogue, and dissolve the house and even call for a referendum as per the requirement. So all these powers are vested in the position of president in Sri Lanka. Prime Minister is considered as the number two in the executive hierarchy, but he or she should enjoy majority in parliament. So there is also existence of Prime Minister in Sri Lanka, but it comes number two and in the executive hierarchy. So Prime Minister step in if the president is unable to perform her or his duties due to illness or absence from the country. So in the place of president, Prime Minister can step in and took his and perform his functions. But with the passage of 20th Amendment of the Constitution that we were discussing in our previous slide, presidential powers have been enhanced, making the role of Prime Minister more or less ceremonial. So the powers of the president increased with the 20th Amendment of the Constitution, and it enhanced, making the which makes the role of the Prime Minister more or less ceremonial. So, legislative power of Sri Lanka is vested with the people but exercised by a unicameral parliament. So, if we compare with India, India is a bicameral parliament where we discussed that India has two, there are two southern. It is in Hindi it is known as southern, where there is Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. But in Sri Lanka, the legislative power is vested on the people, but it is exercised by a unicameral parliament. Sri Lanka follows a proportional representation system to elect its parliamentarians, and the whole country is divided into 22 electoral districts. So, because Sri Lanka is a very small country, an island country, that is why there are not more than 22 electoral districts. Now, let's talk about the political processes in Sri Lanka. So, despite at one point being dubbed as a model of third world democracy, Sri Lankan political process has been a roller coaster ride. So, we can say that at one point of time, Sri Lanka was such a country that it was considered to be as a model of third world democracy. But whatever is happening in the country internally, you can say that it is something which is very anarchic. So it was one of the few countries to get used to parliamentary form of governance and adopt universal adult franchise much before its independence. So this is something to be noted down, that Sri Lanka is a country which adopted these systems like universal adult franchise, which give right to vote to every adult, and the parliamentary form of governments even before its independence. So at the same time, the Sri Lankan polity has been confronted by major ethnic conflict, youth radicalization, and elite domination. So, what the problems that Sri Lanka is facing? The first problem is major ethnic conflict. That is something which is impacting Sri Lanka very much. So, the first thing that is impacting its political process is the ethnic conflict. Secondly, the youth radicalizations and elite domination. So, although a multi ethnic society, majoritarianism has been a dominant character of Sri Lankan political system. So, there are multiple ethnicities residing in the country, but there is a rule of majoritarianism. So, that is something which is defining the Sri Lankan political process. Since the very beginning, Sinhala dominated state pursued policies that alienated minorities. As we learned in our previous slides, that it is the Sinhalas who are in majority, whereas all others are in small numbers. So, because they are in majority, Sinhala community dominating over all the minorities in Sri Lanka. So, it started with plantation Tamils in the form of Citizenship Act of 1948. So, as we discussed about the history of plantation Tamils who came from India as a laborer taken by the Britishers for plantation purposes in Sri Lanka, and that domination and alienation of these minorities started in Sri Lanka with alienating the plantation Tamils. And it is done through the Citizenship Act of 1948. Later, Sinhala Only Act of 1956 and Standardization Act of 1972 targeted the Sri Lankan Tamils. So it's the 1948 Citizenship Charter Act started with plantation Tamils. Later on, with gradually all other acts were passed to target the Sri Lankan Tamils as well. So the Tamils are the neglected community in Sri Lanka, and they are considered to be alienated, they are marginalized, and they are oppressed and dominated by the Sinhala community. So, by ascribing Buddhism the foremost place in the constitution, the message was very clear that Buddhism has state support and patronage. So, why this line is here in this slide? Because Buddhism is there, and these Sri Lankan Tamils and plantation Tamils follow either Hinduism, Islam, and Sinhalas are basically Buddhists. So that is why there is Buddhism's majority in the country, whereas the minorities follow different religions apart from Buddhism. Now let's talk about the rise of radicalism in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan government was unable to address the socio-political and economic grievances of the youth. So we will be learning here why youth are becoming radicals. What are the reasons that gave the way to the youth to become a radical, to become a revolutionary? So here one of the reason behind this radicalism is that the government is unable to address the socio-political and economic grievances that these youths have. So the country witnessed three radical movements: Sinhala, Tamil, and Islamic. So they turned violent in an organized manner as political structures of the island state perceived them as just law and order problems. So initially they were violent, and but they were perceived as just law and order problems, and the hidden problem is not taken care of. So a basic distinction, however, among these radical movement is while Tamil radical movement was ethno-nationalistic, the other two were ideological. It was a result of the then existing socio-economic crisis. So why this group formed? Because of the existing socio-economic crisis that Sri Lanka was facing. The failure of moderate political groups in articulating interest, especially of the Sinhala youth, led to radical groups like JVP. So, because political parties, the parties in the power, the central government was not able to address the issues that people were facing. That is the reason why this Sinhala youth became radical and organized a group known as Janata Vimukti Peramuna. So this Janata Vimukti Peramana, in short form, we will be using JVP to address it. So this JVP appealed to Sinhala nationalism and displayed a sense of exclusion towards minorities. So this radical group, they feel that there is a need for Sinhala nationalism, and all these minorities are and they should be excluded, because that is something which this JVP was preaching. So most of the active members of the group were rural Sinhala, educated, unemployed, mostly from poor and middle class, the fourth person. So who were there in this Janata Vimukti Peramuna group? They were basically the rural people who are educated but unemployed. And they also belong to the poor and the middle class families. Now, we learned about Sinhala militancy. We will be talking about Tamil militancy, why it rose. So, ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka turned violent due to the insensitivity of the state in addressing the genuine grievances of the Tamil community. So, here we can see there is a failure of the government in Sri Lanka which could not address this very important issue, which added to the grievances that people already have. So the consequent resort to arms by the frustrated and radicalized Sri Lankan Tamil youth. So people were very upset with however the whatever ways the government was running itself. So their issues were not addressed, and that is the reason why people were becoming frustrated, and that is the reason why there was a rise of this radical ideology and radicalism in the Tamil youth. So they organized themselves in groups and started indulging in, first of all, what they do, how Tamil militancy was creating problem for the state government because state government was not listening to them. The first thing they do was attacking symbol of state power. So because they're against state, they have grievances with the state, so they started attacking the symbols of state power. Secondly, assassination of pro-government personnel. So whoever was taking side of the government and helping the government, so they were enemies of these groups, and that is why there were assassinations of these pro-government personnel. Thirdly, they were robbing the banks, and also in the fourth point, we can say that ambush of security personnel in the northeast. So all these things were done by the Tamil militancy groups, and it was creating a problem, a ruckus, and anarchy in the country. So, at the height of the Tamil insurgency in the mid 1980s, there were five major and nearly 30 splinter militant groups. So, this is something which is a very important matter of concern because there were five major and nearly 30 splinter militant groups that exist in Sri Lanka. So, one of the most prominent among these groups were the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Elam, LTTE. That is one of the most important thing, and it shaped the history of Sri Lanka and as well as India also. Now let's talk about Islamic militancy. Islamic militancy that got manifested in terror attacks, famously called Easter attacks, in April 2019 had been gradual. So this militancy, the rise of the militancy was very gradually took place in Sri Lanka. The underlying context is minority complex of the majority Sinhala communities. The alienation, the exploitation that were happening on the minorities done by the Sinhala community, all these militancy and the radical ideas that came into mind when people are uh, they are at the brink of the river, like you can't do anything else apart from raising your voice. So this was something which happened in Sri Lanka, and Sinhala religious and political leaders has displayed a threat perception from the minorities groups. Tamils and Muslims are the other who cannot be trusted and are deemed anti-nationals. So the Sinhala dominated country, Sri Lanka, considered Tamils and Muslims as others, and they are considered as anti-nationals as well. So, this rise of nationalistic populism is one of the curses of Sri Lankan democratic politics. So, this kind of thinking that they are other, they are anti national, that became a very important problem that grew over time in Sri Lanka. So, the rise of nationalistic populism is considered to be one of the curse, and political parties, media, NGOs, and other civil society groups tend not to have a national perspective on issues pertaining to the concerned ethnic community. So, even with each community, civil society is divided on the stand to be taken on community issues. So, there was no consensus. There was a gap how the communities are performing. So the Sri Lankan civil society is also weak due to mainly to the state's unfriendly attitude. So because state is not supporting, not sponsoring, not sponsored in the sense they were not recognizing these institutions, the civil societies, and not friendly. There is no friendly relation with the government and the civil society. That is the reason why the civil society is very weak there. Their existence was a curse for the government. So those who are critical are stamped as anti-national, unpatriotic, and traitors. So these three terms are used for the people who are not supporting the Sinhala-dominated government in Sri Lanka. So as a result, funding for these groups from international agencies have also dried up. So because there is no recognition of these civil societies in the country, international agencies also they were not very keen to fund these groups. So with this, we learned about Sri Lanka, how Sri Lankan government used to be there, how the problems are there for ethnic conflicts, the problems of minorities. Now we will be moving forward towards the Maldives. So Maldives is considered to be as the smallest of the South Asian countries, and it got independence very later. So Maldives is a very famous tourist destination nowadays, and it was always be, and it is one of the smallest of South Asian countries. Please note it down. and it got independence from Britain on 26th of July 1965. So though dispersed widely with 1192, like 1192 coral islands grouped into 26 atolls, the country's actual land area is just 300 square kilometers and has a population of about 5,50,000. So the country is very small, the population is very less, and the area is also very less in Maldives. And it is comprised of 1,192 coral islands, and it is grouped together and it is known as atolls. So there are 26 atolls. So Maldives is strategically located in the Indian Ocean, southwest of India. So Maldives is in Indian Ocean. It's an island ocean. Sorry, it's an island country, and it is a unitary state and declared itself through 2008 Constitution a democratic republic. So according to the constitution that came into being in Maldives in the year 2008, it is considered to be as a democratic republic where there is presidential form of government. So, protectorate under Dutch and later under British, the Maldives has a long constitutional history starting from 1932, then 1953, 1968, 1998, and finally 2008. So, these were the years in which uh, constitutions was accepted. They started uh, taking place. Whatever there is there in the constitution, it got enacted so many times, but currently it is the 2008 constitution which is going on. Also, it is important to know that the national language of the Maldives is Dhivehi, and Islam is the state religion. So this is something which is very important to know before learning about the political structure of any country. So the present political structure of the Maldives is stipulated under 2008 constitution. So as we learned that there are many constitutions that used to be there in Maldives, but presently it is 2008 constitution that is enacted in the country. So it was drafted based on the roadmap for the reform agenda published by the then government in 2006. So this constitution of 2008 of Maldives was considered to be based on the roadmap for the reform agenda that was presented by the then government in 2006. So there were 8 broad categories of reforms that were identified. So what are these reforms that this roadmap for the reform agenda categorizes? First and foremost, strengthening the system of governance. So what is the reform that it requires? It requires a system of governance which is very strengthened. Secondly, promoting and strengthening the protection of human rights. Human rights also given a very important place in the constitution of Maldives, and that is why the roadmap for the reform agenda also talks about the promoting and strengthening the protection of the human rights. Thirdly, enhancing the independence of the judiciary. For a country to run properly, for a country to run it through justice, it is very important to have an independent judiciary, and Maldives also talks about that. Fourthly, developing the multi-party political system. So the Maldives wanted to have multi-party political system where multi means more than one, uni means one, bi means two, and multi means more than two. So political system in India is multi-party. Similarly, in Maldives also it is a multi-party political system that is suggested by the roadmap for the reform agenda. It wanted the this reform agenda also wanted to strengthen the civil service, modernize the electoral system. It also wanted to enhance the role of media and strengthen the key institutions and civil society. So all these things were demanded, and all these things were considered to be as reform agendas, important points that came in 2006, and basis it this reform agenda became the basis for the constitution drafted in 2008. Now let's talk about the political structures in the Maldives. So the executive power is vested with the president elected directly by an absolute majority popular vote for a term of 5 years. So in Maldives, it is the president who is directly elected by the people residing there with a majority. So whoever got the majority, wins election in Maldives as and become a president, and they become president for the term of 5 years. So the tenure of the president was 5 years. So there is also provision of runoff elections, and if one of the candidates get 50% plus one votes. So with a maximum of 2 terms, the president is both head of the state and the government. So once a president is there in Maldives, he or she can become a president only for 2 terms. And also, the president is the head of the state and also the head of the government. As Commander in Chief of the Maldives National Defense Force, the president enjoys power to declare war on peace concerning the state. So, president is also the commander in chief of the Maldives National Defense Force, and also he has the power to declare war or peace concerning the state. He is responsible to determine, conduct, and oversee the foreign policy of the country and to enter into general treaties, agreements with foreign states and international organizations. So, also, if we talk about the judicial powers, the president appoints judges to the Supreme Court and can grant pardons or reductions of sentences. So, this power also lies with Maldives president. So, all the legislative power in Maldives is vested with the parliament known as People's Majlis. So, what does the Parliament of Maldives known as? It is known as People's Majlis. Please note it down because it is very important when you discuss about all other countries' parliament. There is a need to discuss about Maldives as well, and because it is different from others, so it is important to note it down. The Parliament of Maldives is a unicameral house with 87 members elected to serve for a term of 5 years directly by a simple majority in single seat constituencies. So, how many members are there in the People's Majlis? Only 87 members are there, and their term or their tenure is for 5 years. So, the membership of parliament is pegged to population and hence dynamic. So, because Maldives is also very a country with so many diversities, so it also tries to keep these 87 members very dynamic. So, People's Majlis has the authority to enact, amend, and revise laws aside from the constitution. So, the power is there for the Majlis, who has the authority to enact, amend, revise laws aside from the constitution. Also, one thing which is very important about Majlis is that the power of purse lies with Majlis. So, this is important because it is something which is essential for us, the political science students, to know how the financial system is running in our country. Also, one thing which is very important regarding to Maldives is that Sunni Islam forms the basis of all the laws of the country. So in Maldives, it is the Sunni Islamic rules that is there in the country, and it became the basis of all the laws that exist in Maldives. Thus, the Maldives has a combination of Islamic law and English common law. So there is a mixture, there is a interconnectedness between the Islamic law and English common law in the Maldives. So to qualify for any state position apart from other qualifications laid out, a person must be a Muslim and a follower Sunni school of Islam. So to become any state position in Maldives, it is must to be a Muslim first of all, and apart from Muslim, you have to be follower of Sunni Islam. So there are two criteria that is assigned to the people of Maldives to become or to hold any state position. Also, one thing which is very very important to know is that no person who is not following Islam and is not a Muslim cannot be a citizen. So a non-Muslim cannot be a citizen in Maldives. Even fundamental rights are subjected to the tenets of Islam. So there are fundamental rights in the constitution, but they are subjected to the tenets of Islam. So constitutionally, every citizen of Maldives has the right to establish and to participate in the activities of the political parties. So there are multiple parties which are present operational in Atoll state. Now let's talk about the political processes in Maldives. Maldives has experimented with a mix of US and UK models in the 2008 constitution. So we learned that Maldives has so many constitution in past. Currently, it is the 2008 constitution which is enacted in the country, which is which is guiding the country. So this constitution is a mix of both US and UK models. So if you look around the context of South Asia, to avoid political instability, it was thought that a presidential form would be apt for the atoll state instead of parliamentary one. So there were a system which was very anarchic and very unstable in Maldives, and it is believed that president can perform much more better to resolve all these problems rather than a prime minister in the parliamentary system. So there is presidential form which is there, which is exist in Maldives. So the idea also receives immense support from the people through a referendum. So to understand what people, the population is thinking, there was a referendum which was organized in the country, and this presidential form of system was supported by the majority of the people. So there was a bitter experience over 3 decade long authoritarian rule under Maumoon Abdul Gayoom. So in Maldives, as we learned about authoritarian rules in Pakistan, Bangladesh in our previous sessions, here we are also learning that Maldives was also a victim of the authoritarian rule, and it was Maumoon Abdul Gayoom who was the authoritarian leader, and he ruled for 3 decades. So it's a huge time. 30 years is a huge time for authoritarian rule to exist. So the constitution makers did not want a president with unlimited powers. So it was a fear in the people of Maldives that if we give unnecessary powers, unlimited powers to the president, he or she can also become authoritarian, which they experienced, and it was very bitter. So that is why there was a general consensus that president should not be given wide range of powers, unlimited powers. Therefore, to give a balance, two other pillars of the government, that is there in legislature, was empowered to keep a constant check on the presidency. So, because there is a fear that the president can turn into a authoritarian ruler. So, this country in their constitution also talks about two pillars of the government which can have a constant check on the working and the functioning of the presidency. Independence of judiciary, a key component of any constitutional government, is not up to the mark. So there is also a problem that lies in Maldives. The first thing is that there is a problem having an independent judiciary. There is also constant interference from either the executive or the legislature. So at the same time, the judiciary has failed to assert itself using constitutional provisionals, both individual and institutional. Judiciary is facing very much problem in Maldives because it is not independent and it cannot assert its position because the conditions is such in Maldives that it restricts the functioning of the judiciary properly. The civil society of the Maldives has potential to perform its task but is stifled by the existing security structures. So civil society is way stronger than Sri Lanka that we were talking in our previous part of this session, but here we can see that civil society has the potential to perform, but it is stifled by the existing security structures in the country. So Maldives is constantly engaged with regional and global institutions that promote democracy and human rights. So this is something which is very good about Maldives. Now, we talked about two countries today, that is Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Now we will be completing this political structures and processes with learning about three countries left, that is Afghanistan, Bhutan and Nepal. So we completed India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. We completed Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Now we will be learning about Afghanistan, Bhutan, and Nepal. So these three countries also plays a very important role in the position or in the political sphere of South Asia. And all these three countries are very, both the countries Bhutan and Nepal are small in number, small in size, whereas Afghanistan is war torn area. So these three is also very important to know how the politics is shaping in South Asia. What are the conditions that these countries are facing, what are the problems that these countries are facing, how the problems of these countries are impacting the politics of South Asia. Okay, so let's start. So these three countries of Afghanistan, Bhutan, and Nepal are part of South Asia and also the member of South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation. So it is very important to know the full form of SARC. SARC is very important. We will be learning about SARC in our next sessions, but we should know that SARC stands for South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. And these three countries, Afghanistan, Bhutan, and Nepal, are part of South Asia and also members of SARC. So while Bhutan and Nepal joined the association when it was established in 1985, Afghanistan was inducted into it in 2007. So, Bhutan and Nepal was there in SARC since its inception. The SARC was established in the year 1985, and Bhutan and Nepal was part of SARC since that time. But Afghanistan introduced in SARC and Afghanistan inducted in SARC organization in the year 2007. This is very important to understand because there are many reasons why Afghanistan came late, which we will be learning in our upcoming slides. So, Bhutan and Nepal are also members of BIMSTEC. What BIMSTEC stands for? It stands for Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. Please note it down. It is very important to know all the full forms of these organizations, and it is very, very important in respect of this unit because it is something which defines the functioning of South Asia, how there are groupings, how there are many organizations where these countries are part of. So Bhutan and Nepal are also members of the BIMSTEC. It is also part of BBIN. BBIN basically stands for the initials of four countries, that is Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal. BBIN sub-regional groupings. So Afghanistan, being situated in a different geographical territory, is not a member of these groupings. So Bhutan and Nepal are part of all these organizations, whether it is SARC, BIMSTEC, or BBIN. But Afghanistan's geographical territory is very, very distinct, and it also not a part of these groups. So, for a long time, Afghanistan was considered to be a part of Central Asia. Afghanistan was not considered to be a South Asian country way back, but for a very long time, it was supposed to be a part of Central Asia. Today, it is seen to belong to both South and Central Asia and is in fact considered to be a bridge between the two regions. So, it is believed that whether it has connection with both South Asia and Central Asia, and that is why people consider to be as a bridge between South and Central Asia. So it is seen as an important position to provide rail, road, energy connectivity between the two regions. So it is something which is a connecting factor between South Asia and Central Asia, and it can also provide the position where rail, road, energy connectivity can take place. So all the three countries have been deeply influenced by the culture, cuisine, religion, thoughts, ideas, customs, and traditions of India. So these three countries have a very, very severe influence, and they are mostly follow and they are impacted by the Indian culture, cuisine, religion, ideas, custom, etc. So they have been closely associated with the developments in the country over the last several millennia. Now let's talk about the features of these countries. So starting with Nepal, it is predominantly Hindu. Bhutan is a predominantly Buddhist country, whereas Afghanistan is predominantly Muslim, though with many ethnically diverse elements. So Nepal is Hindu, Bhutan is Buddhist, Afghanistan is Muslim with different different ethnicities. So their political structures are also widely different. So we are talking about these countries in same unit, but they have very distinct identities and political structures from each other. So Bhutan is a democratic and constitutional monarchy. Nepal, whereas, is a sovereign, inclusive, secular, federal, and republic country. In 2015, constitution states that the country comprises of multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious people living in diversified geographical locations. Currently, let's talk about Afghanistan, is controlled by the Taliban. Taliban is a terrorist group. It is an extremist group which is very considered to be anti-human because it is something which talks and follows the terrorist practices. So, from early September 2021, a caretaker administration principally comprising of elements of the Taliban and Haqqani network. So, the year 2021 was a very devastating year for Afghanistan when caretaker administration comprised the elements of Taliban and Haqqani network. They have been proscribed by the United Nations as well as the several governments. So many countries, the United Nations, they were not accepting the not accepting the coming up of Talibani government caretaker administration in Afghanistan because it is considered to be one of the biggest problem for any country to be overtaken by a Islamist extremist basically group. Here in this situation, it is the extremist group. They describe the regime as the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Considerable uncertainty and anxiety prevails in the region regarding the future of Afghanistan and its impact on the neighboring countries. So, after the taking over of Afghanistan by the Taliban, there are many restrictions that was imposed on the people living there. Women were not treated equally. There were no democracy. People can't talk negative about the caretaker administration of Taliban. So these are the problems that Afghanistan is facing, and that is the reason why the neighboring countries are also in fear what to do, because neighboring countries including India, Pakistan, they are also very close connections and proximity. The areas are very in close proximities where there is a fear that what will be the result of this Talibani caretaker administration in Afghanistan and how it will impact the other nations. Now let's talk about the similarities and differences between Afghanistan, Bhutan and Nepal. So there are many similarities, there are many differences. We will be discussing about this in upcoming slides. Let's start with Bhutan and Nepal. Firstly, between Nepal and Bhutan, both are landlocked countries. So, since we started our course in South Asia, Introduction to South Asia, I was talking about the landlocked countries. Again, I am repeating that landlocked countries are the countries which does not have any sea or any water bodies in the sense through which they can have business, they can have, you know, they can sail through, they can have business with other countries. So they doesn't have any sea for merchandise. So these two countries are situated between India and China, and they are both located in Himalaya. So these are the similarities that Bhutan and Nepal is having between them. That first of all, they are landlocked, they situated between India and China, they are located in Himalayas, and neither of them was ever occupied by any foreign power. So this is also common between Bhutan and Nepal, that they are not occupied by any outside power, and both these countries, Bhutan and Nepal, are heavily dependent upon the tourism for employment as well as support to their economies. So tourism plays a very important role in Bhutan and Nepal's economic system because that is the major source of their income. So both the countries have entered into the consular arrangements with India, by which the citizen of the two countries can travel to each other's territory without visas or passports, etc. So these two countries are having a very good relation with India, and it allows to have citizens of these two countries to travel each other's territory without any visas and passports. So we talked about the similarities between Bhutan and Nepal. Let's talk about the differences between the two countries. So some of these include the cultural complexion of the two nations, which are entirely different. So the cultural complexion in Bhutan and Nepal are very, very different from each other. Where Nepal shares many cultural affinities with India, Bhutan has predominant Tibetan influence. On one hand, Nepal is very culturally similar with India, whereas on the other hand, Bhutan is very culturally similar to Tibetan practices, Tibetan influence. There is Tibetan influence in Bhutan. So, in addition, Nepal is a predominantly Hindu nation with minority Muslim and Buddhist population. So, in Nepal, we can find that the majority of the people are from Hinduism religion, whereas Muslims are minority, and Buddhists are also there in the country, but they are also in minority, we can say. So, Bhutan, whereas, has predominant Buddhist population with a significant Hindu minority. So, in Bhutan, Hindus are in minorities and Buddhists are in majority. Bhutan continues to be a constitutional monarchy in which the king has bestowed much power and authority to the parliament. So in Bhutan, the royal family still exists and there is constitutional monarchy, but the major powers and authority is vested in the parliament. The king is the head of the state, and executive power is vested in the cabinet headed by the prime minister. So in Bhutan, head of the state is the king, just like Britain, where the constitutional monarch, the king or the queen, is the head of the state in Britain. And here in Bhutan, the executive power is vested in the prime minister. Nepal was a constitutional monarchy from 1990. So Bhutan we talked about. Now let's talk about Nepal. It was also a constitutional monarchy from 1990 till 2008 when it became a republic after abolishing the monarchy. So in 2008, the people of Nepal they abolished the monarchy and created Nepal as a republican country. Today, Nepal is a parliamentary democracy. So Nepal is guided by democracy in today's time. Whereas Bhutan is a Buddhist country, while Nepal has been secular since 2006. So initially, Nepal was mainly dominated by the Hindus, but since 2006, it considered to be as a secular country, whereas Bhutan is a Buddhist country. Nepal is a much larger country than Bhutan in terms of land area as well as population. So, if we talk about the composition of population, Bhutan is smaller than the Nepal. Nepal is much more bigger than Bhutan, whereas Nepal has practically no strictly enforceable environmental policy. There are no strictly environmental policies could be found in Nepal, but Bhutan has a highly developed and conscientious environmental policy due to which tourists are required to be on strictly controlled tours. So Bhutan is very, very active, very, very aware about the environmental concerns, and that is the reason why tourists are guided about the strict practices that Bhutan needs to follow to conserve the environment. Deforestation is only permitted in Bhutan with special permission from the royal government. So you cannot go and you start deforesting. No company, no organization can do that. For that, you need a special permission from the royal government. Now let's talk about Afghanistan and Nepal. Both Afghanistan and Nepal are mountainous countries situated on the west and east ranges of the Himalayas, respectively. So, mountains is a commonality between Nepal and Afghanistan. Afghanistan is also situated in Himalayas, whereas Nepal is also a mountainous country situated on the east ranges of Himalayas, whereas Afghanistan was situated in the western ranges of Himalayas. So it is there minerals and natural resources are present in Afghanistan, but due to the lack of peace and lack of stability in the country, they cannot exploit these resources. So the takeover by the Taliban in August 2021 has created further insecurity and instability in Afghanistan and the region. So earlier also there were a past when during Cold War the Afghanistan was also very impacted with that, with the rivalries between USA and USSR at that point of time. But from after that also Afghanistan was a country which is very devastated, and with the advent of the Taliban's in August 2021, again when it was trying to establish itself again, so with the coming up of Taliban it again became insecure and unstable. So, in terms of human development indices, Nepal and Bhutan are much better off than Afghanistan, although all of them are included in the category of least developed countries. So, Nepal, Bhutan, and Afghanistan, they are in the same unit, and the reason is that all these three countries are considered to be the least developed countries in South Asian region. So that is why they are in the same. We are learning about these countries in a same unit. As I told you that I will tell you the reason. So this was the reason. But it is here to point out. It is here to note that Nepal and Bhutan are much better than Afghanistan, but they are in the same category. All these three countries, that is Afghanistan, Bhutan, Nepal, they are landlocked and least developed countries. So the what is the similarities between them? The similarity is that all the three countries are landlocked and they are least developed. Now let's talk about the geography of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is situated at the crossroads of Asia. As we learned in our previous slide that it is part of both Central and South Asia, it is often called as the heart of Asia. This is which country is considered to be a heart of Asia? It is Afghanistan. So Afghanistan shares its longest land border, the Durand line, with Pakistan to the east and south. So this is also very important that Pakistan share its longest land border, which is known as Durand line, with which country? With Pakistan. So followed by borders with Tajikistan in the to the northeast, Iran to the west, Turkmenistan to the northwest, Uzbekistan to the north, and China to the northeast. So what are the countries that are the neighboring countries of Afghanistan? Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, China, Iran, etc. So no Afghan government has recognized the Durand line border with Pakistan. It is also very important to note down. India considers the Gilgit-Baltistan area as part of its union territory of Jammu and Kashmir, illegally occupied by the Pakistan. So, because that territory, as per India, is illegally occupied by the Pakistan, the areas of Gilgit-Baltistan, thus it justifies the claims that it shares border with Afghanistan. So, if that area is not illegally occupied by the Pakistan, then India and Afghanistan would be sharing border. Let's talk about the recent history of Afghanistan. So in December 1979, Soviet troops invaded Afghanistan to install a friendly government. From 1980 to 1989, armed Mujahideen groups fought Soviet and government forces. For during this time, hundreds of thousands of Afghans got killed in the struggle while millions became refugees. So you can see that how the instability is still there in Afghanistan, and in most Afghans, in the most part of it, it is exhausted by droughts, famine, war, and also approved of Taliban for upholding the traditional Islamic laws. With this, I end this unit here. We will be learning about our next unit in our next session. Thank you.